Welcome back to the Your Project Shepherd Construction Podcast. I'm Curtis Lawson. Thanks for joining us again. Last week, Brian and Heather's demo plans were cut short with a bright red stop work order taped to their front door of the house they were tearing down. With big holes in the roof and walls, the demo guy packed it up and told them to find somebody else to finish. No mention of the $12,000 plus they'd already paid him. Heather was undeterred, and she'd already taken the day off work, so she decides to figure out the next steps. First thing, she calls the city to see about obtaining the demo permit. A permit clerk on the phone tells her that since they've already started work without the permit, they have to pay double permit fees. Heather's stomach drops, and the clerk goes on. They're also going to need a gas disconnect, an electrical disconnect, and get a plumber to pull a sewer disconnect permit. The clerk is kind of picking up on Heather's naivete to the process and advises that the demolition company usually takes care of the sewer permit. She adds that most of the demo companies in town should know the proper steps because they do this all the time. They then wonder out loud why their builder wasn't handling all this for them. Heather tries to briefly explain and mentions that the pool also needs to be filled in the backyard. And the clerk's like, that's another permit. And the city requires something called compaction testing to be performed by an engineer as the dirt goes back into the pool hole just 8 inches at a time. He also says that every piece of concrete has to be broken up and removed, which comes as a shock to Heather because the demo company told her that he was just going to poke some holes in it and collapse it in on itself and cover it with dirt. It seemed legit at the time because a pool was made of concrete and the concrete is solid, right? Heather's opinion of the demo guy is going down more and more with each new item added to the to-do list. So even though she's more slightly rattled than she was in the morning, she's undaunted. She makes the necessary phone calls to start checking boxes off the list that the permit clerk gave her. She spent about 3 hours on the phone with the gas and electric companies and has basically gotten nowhere. The call center reps on the phone have no idea how to take these kinds of requests. She knows there has to be a department that deals only with construction, but she just can't seem to find it. So she decides to pivot and calls a large, reputable plumbing company who should know about sewer disconnects, right? So after agreeing to pay their $125 call-out fee, she has an appointment on the books for tomorrow morning. So the next morning, she's waiting patiently at the house, and a plumber walks up and with his eyes just kind of glassy fixed on the house and says, what do you want me to do here? And Heather goes on to explain that the city requires a water and sewer disconnect for their new construction. The service plumber just kind of shakes his head. He doesn't even know what this means. His job is basically unclogging toilets and fixing leaky sinks. But he says he'll talk to his boss about it. So as the plumber drives away, Heather starts to get that sinking feeling again in her stomach, and maybe she's in over her head on this one. Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in once again to the Your Project Shepherd podcast. I'm your host, Curtis Lawson with Shepherd Construction Advisors. And as you've heard us say before, the purpose of this show is to teach that there are 4 key components to every successful construction project, which are illustrated by a very simple child's drawing of a house. The foundation is planning, the left wall is your team, the right wall is communication, and the roof protecting the whole thing is proper execution. Today, we're going to talk about the importance of building your project team. It's that left wall of the diagram that I just described. I am joined by my friend from BrickMoon Design, Jeremy McFarland. Thanks for coming on the show, Jeremy.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Jeremy is a native Texan. He kind of checks all those native Texan boxes. Born in Texas, grew up in Houston, went to Texas A&M. Whoop. Yeah, I was waiting for that.
Yeah, I knew it was coming.
And he's owned BrickMoon Design for about 15 years now. Is that right?
15.
All right, man, we're getting old.
Getting old.
Time is flying.
When we met, you weren't as good looking and didn't have as much gray hair, so there you go.
I wish I could say the same. Now, Jeremy, I know that you're a big proponent of the team approach because we've talked about it before, and I've heard you stress it when you're speaking at like some GHBA, some industry events and luncheons. So let's talk about that. How many different people, first off, are involved in the planning of a construction project before it starts?
Well, there's a lot, right? And it really takes a great team to pull this thing off. And so it's not just architecture and it's not just building. There's a lot of people that touch a project and are part of that process. So from real estate agents to lenders to architects, engineers, both structural and civil. You've got geotechnical soils reports that have to get done. You've got some survey work. There's a lot of things that come together, right? On the engineering side, you really got to look at foundations, soils, how those come together and how that interacts and coordinates with the architecture.
Mm-hmm.
And the structural engineer needs the soils test before he can do that. And before we can even start with that work, we need a survey.
Right.
So there's a lot of people that have to do a lot of things up front. And really the team that the custom homeowners are assembling, right, has to manage and coordinate all that work.
Right. And so which of those people that we just talked about do you try to bring in under your umbrella and manage yourself?
Absolutely. So it kind of depends on when the client arrives to see us, right? A lot of times clients come to us before they have anybody else. Sometimes they come with a builder already. But ultimately, we have to manage and coordinate all of that, whether it's under somebody else's umbrella or under ours or collectively under the team's umbrella.
Mm-hmm.
So most clients come to us and they have a piece of property, right? Whether it's an existing house that they're trying to remodel or a piece of property they want to tear a house down and build a new piece of property or new house, right? So we've got to say, we need all of these tools for us to be successful and lead them through this collaborative process. So if they don't have any of those things, guess what? We're going to bring them in, we're going to tell them what they need, and we got to assemble that team so that we can have all the right information.
What are the pitfalls of somebody that tries to do all that themselves? Like, they're like, hey, I'm going to go out and I'm going to find my own architect, engineer, builder. I'm going to oil the soils test, the survey. I mean, they try to do that all themselves. What are the pitfalls there?
Well, sometimes they don't get the right information. For example, I'll just talk about a survey. So they purchase a piece of property or an existing house, and they get a survey with the closing.
It's a boundary survey.
It's a boundary survey, and it could be a survey from 2004, right? Well, they think they're ready to go. Well, that survey is not an adequate survey. So flood maps have changed, setbacks could change, city code could change. There's so many factors.
There's a lot of types of surveys too, right?
That's right.
We talked about this the other day. Like, you got to have power lines in the survey, and how many homeowners know that you're supposed to capture the power lines on your survey?
Not very many. So there's a lot of pitfalls, right? But it's really what you got to think about is a design or construction professional. This is what we do all the time. So we have really good relationships with all the people that do these things, right? So we typically get better pricing than the homeowner does. We also know the right questions to ask and the information that's needed for those items. And so we just fill in the gaps, right? A lot of times, if they have some of those pieces, we're analyzing some of those pieces and seeing if it's adequate. If it's not, we're figuring out how to make it correct, right? But my best advice is hire professionals, right? And they're going to lead you through a very collaborative process and make sure that you have everything that you need when you need it. And it also minimizes doing it twice, which usually costs more money.
There's also a lot of handoffs back and forth there, right? From you to the engineer, from you to the builder, the surveyor, the soil test. I mean, there's so many different handoff points. And usually, just like in basketball or anything else, football, when the ball gets handed off, that's when it gets dropped oftentimes.
Yeah. Anytime you change, there's an opportunity for a drop, right? So getting that all up front, having it assembled, coordinated, and managed properly is really important.
Yeah. What are some types of things that often get missed or dropped during that handoff if somebody's not handling it appropriately?
Well, we can talk
on the spot.
We can talk about a lot, right? If you aren't thinking about the survey up front, you may make a mistake with some setbacks. And so you get further down the road, you didn't do your due diligence. Now you've got a design in place or an idea that actually doesn't work. Now you got to go back and unravel all that to fix it. From an engineering perspective, we have people call us all the time and say, we want to design a new house. We want to get started. And I say, okay, where's it going to go? Well, we don't actually have a lot yet. We're just looking. Can't we just design something and get started? And the answer is no.
Right.
Unless you have a completely flat piece of land out in the middle of nowhere with no jurisdiction. There's so many things that the team is working through to make sure that your project is successful.
Mm-hmm.
Orientation, views, context, setbacks, deed restrictions, homeowners associations, city jurisdiction and codes, soil types.
Yeah.
There's so many things.
We just talked about this on a previous episode with another architect, and in that episode, in our story, Brian and Heather had bought a lot on their own without knowing anything about it, and then they bought some house plans on the internet.
Oh, we love that.
And so we talked about, hey, house plans on the internet are made to build a house in a vacuum.
Right.
They're made to build a house out in the middle of a field in Nebraska.
Right. Not
on a lot in a city, or really hardly anywhere.
Probably they're literally designed in a vacuum, right?
Yeah.
We can go. I can talk a lot about that if you want to talk about that, but I don't recommend that, by the way.
No. So aside from the design process, even once you get into kind of the handoff from architect to builder, architect to designer, whatever, there's a lot more opportunities for the ball to be dropped because the overall vision for the project has to be effectively communicated, right?
Absolutely.
And one thing that we see a lot is if somebody has those parties that don't work together, like, they'll have an architect, but they'll go out and bring in another interior designer, or maybe a friend as a interior designer,
right.
quote unquote, right? Well, the architect's vision doesn't always get translated or communicated to the designer.
That's right.
And so oftentimes that person will come in and try to make a bunch of changes to it, and they don't understand how the project arrived at this point, right? And so that's a place that we see the ball dropped quite often.
Yeah, and if you think about it, the more chefs you put in the kitchen, the more ideas are coming into play. So if you assemble a team up front, you communicate a clear vision of what you're trying to accomplish, then that collective team can go to work collaboratively together. It minimizes changes, which ultimately saves money, and it turns into a really good project. So again, part of this is establishing the right team, and anytime that baton is handed off, there's an opportunity for that ball to drop.
Mm-hmm.
And when clients go out and try to bid out a project at the very end of design, well, guess what? This other team that's been working on the project has a very intimate knowledge about what the client's trying to achieve,
mm-hmm.
and we put together really good drawings, but there's still a brain and a heart that's represented in these black and white lines that if the rest of the team hasn't been brought up to speed and understands why did we make this one decision or what's really important about this detail to the client themselves, that's a really big opportunity to drop the ball.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a fan of bringing in outside people at the last minute. I mean, and I don't want to pick on interior designers, but especially designers at the last minute. I know there's a lot of great designers out there, and it's not that they're not capable of doing good work, but they get brought in too late in the process. They often have their own vision.
It's a new vision
that conflicts with the original intent. And I hate to say this, but a high percentage of those don't know construction very well. And so they might bring in something that you just can't build it within what's already been, the confines of what's already been designed,
established,
right? Yeah. And of course the homeowner wants to listen to them because now they're paying them money, and maybe it's a friend, and they're like, oh, well, I should really listen to this person now, right?
So what we always say is, hey, if we're going to start a project, first of all, are you interested, and we'll just talk about interior design in a second, are you interested in bringing in a designer? So our company has in-house interior design as well, but we also do projects with homeowners that, they did a previous house, or their aunt or cousin or whatever is an interior designer. We're like, that's fine. But if they're going to have an opinion on the project, they're going to be one of the collaborators that's going to have input. We need to get them to the table early.
Yeah.
So that vision, everybody hears the client's vision, everybody understands budget, everybody understands constructability. And so as those ideas are coming together, they're being worked on cohesively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So aside from this high level of coordination that has to take place when you have a large number of people involved, today's homes are also just more complex in general. So aside from just kind of all the people and the design process being, confusing for a lot of people and complex, the actual house itself is more complex. And that can be, due to construction methods, the internal systems of the house, how it interacts with the climate. What other ways is building a home today harder than maybe it was for somebody of our parents' generation?
Well, there's a lot of things. I mean, I'm going to touch on some of the things you already mentioned, right? But building science is at a completely different place than it was, and we build houses completely different than the way we used to, right? Houses used to breathe a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Now we build Yeti coolers, right? And we say, hey, nothing else in. We're going to protect this environment, right? Especially in Houston, where we are today, right? Hot, wet, moist, nasty climate, right? Anybody else want to move here? It's amazing. But
it's great for 3 months out of the year.
Absolutely. Food is great here, by the way. But it's really how you treat that envelope that changes things. So that's one idea. The other thing is we're all so connected in this generation. We used to get vision, right? It was either what we saw on our own street or something that we saw in a magazine. And now with the internet in our hands and all these, I call it architecture candy websites that show all these amazing houses, and everybody's looking at all those houses, they come in wanting all these amazing things, right?
Yeah.
And so that causes some challenges for us and the whole team, right? Because most people are trying to execute and their expectations at a very high level, and we have to align that with a realistic budget of what they want to spend.
Right.
So that's another complicated piece of the puzzle. And then it's also a very litigious society that we live in today that didn't used to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
So we really have to dot our I's and cross our T's and make sure that these balls aren't dropped, because everybody's looking for a way out when there's a problem.
Right.
And what I always communicate to all of our clients is everybody that you as the homeowner are assembling should have the same mission and vision: a great house and a happy homeowner. And that's everybody on your team. And you truly are assembling a team to make this happen. So that team needs to be communicating well, listening to each other, thinking proactively, thinking ahead of you, the homeowner. You don't know the right questions to ask all the time, but we do, because we do this. Always tell people, no matter what size, how expensive, how sophisticated, what style, we have to go through the same process, because we can't skip steps, because that's where the problems exist.
Mm-hmm.
If you skip process, it equals problem.
Mm-hmm. Totally. You mentioned budget a second ago being one of those items, because people come in, they're like, oh man, I saw this house in a magazine with these amazing sliding doors opening to the pool, and gotta have that here in Houston.
Sure.
It'd be so nice to open my doors and let the outside in, right?
Let all those mosquitoes in. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah, big love fest with mosquitoes. How often do people come to you with a realistic concept of budget?
Very rarely. People, I don't know where it comes from, right, but have some preconceived idea of what things cost. I'll give you a classic example. Had it happen today. Sitting down with a homeowner, they come in. We were interviewing for a potential project. I asked them, because I always ask them, first of all, what are your goals? What's important to you? How big do you think the house is going to be? What style? A lot of the standard questions, right? And then I say, how much do you think or want, or what do you hope this costs? And they, everybody kind of doesn't like answering that question for some reason,
look
right?
Down,
kind of like,
the feet.
Look at each other, and honestly, what I always try to communicate to the homeowners is your team has to look through the right set of lenses.
Mm-hmm.
If you tell us you have a budget of X versus X plus 2, we're going to think and lead you through the process differently, because we have to, as a team, lead you to a solution that you love, that you understand what it costs, and you're comfortable with it. And that's a successful project.
Yeah.
So very rarely do people know what it costs. or they're comparing it to the house that they did 12 years ago or 15 years ago, and pricing is not the same today as it was 12 to 15 years ago.
Or they compare it to what they've seen maybe out in the suburbs. They're like, oh, man, I saw a 4,500 square foot house for sale out there for $500,000. Why can't I do that?
And so I go, we probably can, but let's look at the differences of that house versus what you're communicating and telling us. And if this vision and price aligns with what you're trying to do, well, then maybe we can get there. But very rarely is that the same set of lenses.
Yeah. And you should probably go try to hire that production builder to build this house in town, because I can't build it for $150 a foot. Or
and honestly, when they come in, they probably can't either.
Right.
So, but they can get a lot closer.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a completely different house.
Yeah, it's a different product altogether.
Absolutely.
Why are people scared to be honest about their budgets?
I think it stems from, there are horror stories out there on doing a custom home or remodeling, and all those stories exist because a good team wasn't hired.
Mm-hmm.
And they're out there.
Every day.
Every day. It's happening. And so I think people have a hard time trusting people. And so if I tell you what my budget is, you're going to spend all of it. Mm-hmm. And the reality is, I've been doing this a long time, and almost every single person that sits in my office, I rarely use the word always. Always wants more than what they want to spend. And so the team that you're assembling isn't trying to spend all your money. They're actually trying to make your project successful.
Yeah.
And that success is a great house that you love, that comes at a price that you understand and are comfortable with.
Yeah.
And that is a process that leads to a science, not the reverse.
Right.
So I know you love this question, Curtis. You get that phone call. How much does it cost to build a custom home? Yeah. How much does it cost to buy groceries? Depends on what you put in the bag, right?
Yeah.
So that's what the team is doing. So, for example, client in our office today, we had this conversation. Of course, their budget wasn't at a level that supported the vision that they were trying to accomplish. Mm-hmm. So then I started the education process, which is part of every process. There's education through this whole process. Mm-hmm. And that's where a great team comes in handy, because they're able to educate you. So we talked about, why does this budget not align with what I want to do? So we walked through that. And so over the series of that meeting, I was able to explain to them, look, we care what the budget is for sure, because we want your project to be successful. But whether it's here or here, you have to tell us what you're capable or willing to spend. Now it's our job with the team that you assemble to build the puzzle that checks as many of the boxes that you're trying to accomplish within a budget that you're comfortable with. Mm-hmm. And I always say, every single decision is an opportunity to add or save money.
Right.
In a custom home. It's not like we pull out the granite board and these are your three options, right? A, B, or C, A's included, and these are the upgrades. In a custom home, you truly can pick anything that you want, but the team has to also align you to make decisions at a price point that's going to work with your budget expectations. And for us, it's not even worth us starting the design process if the vision and the budget aren't even possible. Mm-hmm. So I will tell a client, I would love to design your house for you. Unfortunately, if these two things are that far out of alignment, everyone here is set up for failure.
Yeah.
Myself and you as the homeowner.
Unfortunately, I think sometimes people don't believe that, and so they go and try to find it somewhere else. It's like, hey, Jeremy, I know that you've been doing this for 20 years, but I don't think you're right. I heard there's another builder, another architect who can do it for this price.
And you know what? I say, well, good luck.
Right.
And call us if we can help you. We wish you the best. And that's all I can do, right? And I can tell you, I've had people call me back and said we should have listened. Mm-hmm. And I've had people leave, go try that other way. It fails. They come back and say, how do we fix this or solve this? And then it's a whole nother series of problems. But then we jump in and go back to education.
Yeah.
What have you learned? Now, how do we redo this in an appropriate manner?
Yeah.
So it is successful.
I mean, I get hired on consulting cases all the time, more and more, where somebody has hired that very cheap builder, and usually that's coupled with a very cheap home design as well.
Correct.
And then 6 months after they're living in it, they're calling me or Toner, our friend Toner, to come figure out why the house is not performing, or why all their finishes are terrible, or whatever. So, if you have a trustworthy, experienced team, we're going to shoot you straight with what things actually cost. We're in business to make money. We're not in business. We're not staying in business by ripping people off. And so, what we're telling people is honest feedback on their budget and what they can achieve.
Yeah. I mean, clearly, well, can't say this is for everybody, but I know you and I know our company, we all want a great house, and we want our homeowners to be happy because it pays forward from there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we were out ripping people off, even if they had a really nice house, it's not going to pay forward.
Right.
So honesty is the best policy. Isn't that an old saying, right?
Yeah. So how does, going back to the team concept for a second,
mm-hmm.
how does having that complete team early in the process or through the process affect the budget? How does that help us make sure that the budget is being adhered to?
So it's checks and balances. So architecture by default is artistic.
Mm-hmm.
And our job is I always tell people we're professional puzzle builders. The homeowner gives us the required puzzle pieces, and it's our job to do a great job of listening and leading to assemble that puzzle so that all those things happen. When you have a team assembled, you can do pricing exercises. You can check things in schematic design so that you're not designing all the way to the finish line. You've hired the structural engineer, all these consultants, and then you get a price.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody goes, oh my goodness. Now what do you do, right? Well, what we did effectively in that kind of scenario is we went way too far.
Yeah.
So you'll hear this in my office all the time: slow down to speed up.
Mm-hmm.
That extra time that you spend getting a good team and doing pricing along the way takes a little longer, but it ultimately saves you money in the long run because you get a really good set of drawings that's coordinated. The price that you ultimately sign a construction contract with, because the team has been working on it and you understand what I'm getting, the price reflects what you're expecting, so it actually reduces stress.
Mm-hmm.
And then everybody downstream from the drawings gets to follow the drawings instead of interpreting the drawings.
Right.
And when you interpret things, you're only as good as the interpreter.
Right.
And so that's where problems happen. That's where the nasty word change order comes from, right? And what I always tell homeowners is a change order isn't the builder trying to screw you.
Right.
It's because, again, projects happen a lot of different ways. If somebody raced to the finish line and what the builder is able to price out based on the information that they're given reflects what they've interpreted or understand it to be.
Yeah.
And if it was misinterpreted or a homeowner has a different vision of what was interpreted, there's a gap.
Yep.
So what do we do with the gap? The gap is the change order.
Yep.
Because guess what? You have to stay in business. You can't do changes for free. And I know that you guys do try to accommodate as much as you can, right? But again, a great team, a great set of drawings that defines and includes what expected so that the price reflects what the expectations are, it just makes everything smoother.
For sure. So having the team involved or having the team assembled early in the process is the ideal outcome for me as well. I mean, I love being at the table during design. First of all, I just love watching you guys work, and I love watching the drawings on the fly and things like that. It's so fun to watch. But for me and my team to kind of have our ears open and know what those conversations are about, how people are going to use the space, how they're going to live, is key for us being successful as well.
Well, and we've done several projects together, and a lot of times every client is unique, right? So every house is different. That's one of the things I love about this business, right? Is even though we're going through the same process and we're using similar tools and techniques to end up with a product, they're all unique.
Yeah.
And so in the process, sometimes to solve one of the puzzle pieces, we've got to think outside the box. One, construction technique. What kind of material are we going to get there? What kind of connection is going to make that look the way it needs to look? And having a team assembled, you can talk through what's the best way to construct this.
Yeah.
Do you have any other ideas that we could accomplish this that's more cost effective or is going to look better,
right,
or is easier to assemble and is going to have fewer problems later? That's where the team really comes in handy.
Yeah. So those budget discussions among the team are key because, again, it may be a difference in construction technique. We might call the engineer and say, hey, we're thinking about designing it this way. Do you see any problems with that? Because it could save us some money. And again, we're not waiting until we're all the way to the end, a full set of plans, permits in hand, and then it's like, oh, crap, this is expensive.
Yeah. No, that book never works out very well.
No.
There's just too many surprises, right? The other thing is sometimes it's not just about the cost or the constructability, right? We're also thinking through the durability or the performance of the house. And so certain solutions are done better in a certain way once we understand the full vision of what the budget is, what the homeowner's trying to accomplish. What's the best way to get there that also, even if it might cost a little bit more for this thing, it actually is going to last that much longer, which again ultimately saves you money in the long run because it's not something that you have to come back later and fix.
Right. Yeah, building performance can occasionally cost a little more upfront, but if you look at the life cycle savings or even just the time that you're going to own the house, which may be 5 years,
sure,
that can be a cost savings for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So having the team assembled early is obviously the right way to do it, and we love when clients come to us that are on board with that approach.
Sure.
What else to you makes kind of a dream client? And this is a question that I'm asking all of our guests.
Sure.
So what's your ideal client, Jeremy?
Well, for us, it's somebody that's interested in a quality house. That doesn't mean it's crazy expensive. They're just interested in design. They want it done well, and they want to assemble a team to help them get there so it's successful. So that's all different styles, all different locations, all different budgets, but they need to be an engaged participant in the process because we're designing your house, not ours. So we're not out building monuments to BrickMoon Design.
Right.
We're out helping design custom homes for homeowners that they're going to live in, do life. It's a forward-giving thing that makes a huge difference in people's lives. So a great client comes asking good questions, wanting help, excited about the process, and his elbows up at the table wanting to do this process. I mean, let's face it. It takes time. It takes money. And most things in life, you get what you pay for. So a perfect client is somebody that's willing, able, and ready to do that.
Yeah. So on the flip side, what kind of person is the wrong kind of person to go through this process?
If time is of the essence and truly the main driver is I'll call it a very strategic budget that is unobtainable, that's a recipe for stress, problems, just a bad it's not going to work out.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating for everybody. And so that's where a good team is going to be honest with you up front and be like, look, we would love to design your house and help you get there, but the vision is not in alignment. And unfortunately, there's no way for us to get you there.
Mm-hmm.
And if we take your project, we're going to make some money in design, but it's not going to translate. And then you're going to be frustrated at us, and it's not worth it.
Do you have to say that to potential clients very often?
We do say it, yes. And most people love transparency and they like honesty. And when we talk to them about it, we're not saying you can't afford it. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is the vision that you've outlined and the budget expectation that you are trying to do that in, those don't align.
Mm-hmm.
So we can help you design a house potentially at this price point, but if that's not the kind of house that you want to live in, well, is it worth going through this process? And for some people, they go, this is the budget. We need to do something that works in this budget, and then they let the team go to work.
Mm-hmm.
And they have to make potentially some challenging decisions. You have to accommodate different decisions or creative solutions. And those are still successful projects as long as the client is willing to make those modifications, roll up their sleeves, make some decisions, let go of some things. And I always say every homeowner has a must-have list. Like, these are non-negotiables.
Mm-hmm.
We have to do these things. And then there's going to be a luxury item list.
Mm-hmm.
And so our job is we have to slay the must-haves and shoehorn as many of the luxury items into that still work at a price point that they understand and are comfortable with.
Yep.
And that's a process.
Yep.
I don't know if that answered your question, but
oh yeah, totally. And that outcome really can not only, but 99% of the time can only be achieved through having that team in place early. You might get lucky and stumble through. Odds aren't in your favor.
It's really not. And I would say the other time. If people don't have the time to do it appropriately, they try to skip steps.
Yeah.
So even if they have the budget, but they don't have the time, that can still equal problems.
Right.
Because that's the weak set of drawings or the loose set of drawings, or didn't do all the right pricing exercises, or didn't make key selections in the process. And then there's interpretations, and then there's...
What's the old... you can have there's three things, and you can pick two: good, fast, or cheap. Right? pick two of those.
Right. I always say there's quality, scope, and budget, and it's an equilateral triangle. And they have to stay equal. Can't be an isosceles.
Yeah.
Back to geometry school here, right? But
I didn't pass that class.
Oh, that's all right. But if you move one of those, the other two have to snap back into place.
Mm-hmm.
So all those have to stay in equilibrium.
Yep. Well, that's a great way to wrap up our discussion today about team. I really appreciate you joining me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you guys as a business partner and a friend. You guys do things the right way, and that's the kind of people that we want to associate with. And if our listeners want to work with you and the BrickMoon team, how do they find you?
Absolutely. Well, we got to love Google, right? Or whatever your platform is, right? Just search BrickMoon Design. We have a website. We also have a really good page on Houzz. So if you're familiar with Houzz, Houzz, you can see a bunch of our work. But BrickMoon as a company has an office here in Houston. We have one in the Woodlands, and we also have one in Wimberley, Texas. So depending upon where your project is at, where you live, we can serve you in a bunch of different ways.
And you guys design houses in other states even. Y'all have done some work in Colorado, I think, some other areas, right?
Yes, Colorado, Tennessee, Florida. So most of our work is in, Texas.
Sure.
But we do projects outside of Texas as long as it makes sense and is a good fit for the project.
Great. Well, thanks again.
Absolutely.
Great
Thanks
to
for
have
having
you.
me.
And to all of you guys listening and watching, thank you so much for being with us. As I said earlier, we teach that every successful project has to have the 4 key components of planning, team, communication, and execution. And those are represented by just the super simple child's drawing of a house. So we hope to see you next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.